So Weird's the Other Side just got a brand new expansion, and there's 2 new factions coming to the game. So whether you're a veteran of the Battle of London or you're brand new to the game, I thought this would be a good opportunity to go through all 8 factions of the game and talk a little bit about their background, the characters that you can find in them, and a little bit about how they play on the table. Now, hopefully by the end of this video, it'll give you a better sense of the background for all the factions in the game, and it'll help you pick which one appeals the most to you. I always say pick based on rule of cool, so that's mostly what we're going to focus on here. But if you need some other help getting into the game, then I'm going to link a couple of different videos in the description that I think you might find really helpful, including this video about what you might need to pick up in order to get into the game, as well as these videos that Retnow has been doing to teach you the rules of the game. It's a great time to get into the other side, so let's jump into it. During the 17th century, a strange portal opened up in eastern Africa. The people of Abyssinia traveled through it and discovered strange gems that later became known as soulstones. They brought some of them back to Earth, and the portal closed before they realized that the soulstones had magical properties. They started studying how to use them, and pretty soon Abyssinia became known as a place of mystical and strange power. But the valuable gems were eagerly sought after, and soon different factions were fighting for them, and many of the gems were either lost or destroyed. With the few soulstones that remained, Amara University was founded to study their strange properties. It was soon discovered that soulstones could not only be used as a source of magic, but also as a source of power, and soon Abyssinia was undergoing an industrial revolution. When the breach to Malifaux was eventually opened, and soulstones were rediscovered, stories of old Abyssinian myths began circulating again. As the nations of Earth scrambled to get their hands on their own stock of the valuable gems, the Abyssinians realized that they were in a vulnerable position. This led to a civil war and a consolidation of power, before the breach mysteriously closed, plunging the rest of the world into the Black Powder Wars. Many nations sought to take Abyssinia as their prize, but with their head start in technology and preparedness, they were able to fend off invaders from all directions. When the war finally settled down, the Guild emerged and seized power, and sought to exert its influence everywhere. The Abyssinians were the first to stand against them. Initially, their lack of cooperation frustrated the Guild, who sponsored many of their enemies, who rose up against the isolated nation. But soon the Guild calmed down, and eventually even sought to have peaceful relations with the Abyssinians. When the breach reopened, Abyssinia claimed they were only interested in Malifaux from a scholarly perspective, but in reality, they were sending spies and other operatives to keep an eye on what the Guild was up to. Then a few years later, the Burning Man arrived, bringing with it violent cultists and horrible monsters from the depths of Malifaux. This existential threat has pushed most factions Earthside into much closer cooperation. Abyssinia currently has 3 commanders available to it. The first is the Lord of Steel. That's actually a title given to the greatest warrior among the Abyssinian army. And the Lord of Steel always wields the Spear of Ages, which has an old green soulstone embedded inside of it. Now this guy was such an aggressive fighter that they actually had a jetpack made up for him, and he's especially good at hit and run tactics. Next up we have Prince Unathi. Now this is the son of the Emperor of Abyssinia, and he's known for utilizing Abyssinia's advanced technology to his advantage in battle. He likes to use experimental weapons and equipment, and while he seems to care a lot about his own people, he's also known to be brutal and ruthless when it comes to his enemies. Last up we have Kasa Okoye. She was always good at engineering, and after getting an education, she joined the military, where she was put in charge of maintaining equipment. She worked her way up through the ranks, and eventually, she was actually sent to the King's Empire as an emissary to try to keep up good relations between the 2 nations. In-game, Abyssinia's defining thing is definitely their ability to draw cards, which are an important resource on the other side because you don't always draw up a full hand every turn. It's all about resource management. As far as their units go, most things in the Abyssinian army are pretty good at shooting and in melee, so they definitely have a lot of flexibility. They also have some of the most expensive units in the game, so if you're playing Abyssinia, you're definitely going to have fewer, more powerful units as opposed to a horde army. The King's Empire was a powerful nation that had colonies all around the known world. Eventually, one of its colonies in the Americas fought a war for independence, which shocked the British and caused them to reassess their approach to colonization, creating a more symbiotic relationship between the British Isles and their overseas territories. When the first breach opened, the King's Empire had a hard time getting access because its former colonies in North America prevented them from getting to the breach. This meant that as the other nations of the world were getting access to soulstones, the King's Empire was forced to focus on its non-magical industrial capabilities. This turned out to be advantageous as the breach soon closed, plunging the world into the Black Powder Wars. This conflict started as a scramble to gain access to the soulstones that were left on Earth, and while no one was interested in attacking the British Isles directly, due to their lack of soulstones, the King's Empire was forced to spread its resources around the globe to defend its colonies. As the war drew to a close, an organization known as the Guild rose to prominence, partially spearheaded by members of the British aristocracy. The Guild controlled the trade of soulstones, and began infiltrating and manipulating the nations of the world, especially the King's Empire, as the Guild's seat of power was in London. Over time, the English people grew tired of the Guild's control, and though they were able to stamp out any unrest at home, many of the overseas colonies were able to openly defy the Guild. When the breach reopened, tensions were at their peak, and the King's Empire began sending their agents through to Malifaux and cooperating with the Arcanists. Supporting this organization not only served as a distraction for the guild, but it allowed the King's Empire to finally get access to illegally smuggled soulstones. This supply of soulstones allowed them to distance themselves even further from the guild, and they soon fully declared independence, forcing the guild to move its headquarters to Vienna. They tried to use economic pressure to bring the King's Empire back in tow, but this open defiance only served as an inspiration for other nations to stop obeying the guild. Had it not been for the arrival of the Burning Man, there may have been an open war between the guild and the King's Empire, but when the apparition appeared, many people realized that they would soon have even bigger problems. Soon, the Gibbering Hordes began pouring through portals and swarming around the city of London, and even after months of resistance, the King's Empire had not rooted out all of the invaders. So the King's Empire currently has 4 commanders available. Charles Edmonton is a soldier who served in the Dragoons as cavalry as well as in the Royal Rifle Corps. He was very successful, leading to his promotion to captain, and he was particularly well known for his accuracy with a rifle. He participated in the Battle of London and apparently saved many civilians' lives. Margaret Bell was an orphan as a child and eventually began working for the state. She worked in intelligence gathering and soon became a spy, eventually becoming the best in the King's Empire. She has magical abilities that she uses to sneak up on her targets, and is known for using a poisoned blade to kill her enemies. Casa Okoye is an engineer from Abyssinia who made her way up through the ranks and eventually was sent to the King's Empire as an emissary. This was intended to increase cooperation between the two nations, and she soon became popular among the King's Empire's troops as well. Rio Edwards is half British and half Japanese. He joined the King's Navy like his father, but military discipline didn't really work with him, and he ended up in an Australian penal colony. Eventually he escaped and stole a boat and rounded up a crew so he could go out on adventures under his own command. On the tabletop, the King's Empire are a gunline army. Most of the models in the army will have some ability to fight in melee, but their big thing is that they're good at shooting from long range, and giving out pin tokens to your enemies, which stops them from closing the distance. The King's Empire units go to glory when they kill an enemy fire team, so it's to your advantage to be pretty aggressive, and pick off weakened enemy units so that you can boost your own abilities. When the Burning Man appeared in the skies above San Francisco, it brought with it chaos and destruction. When it suddenly disappeared and reappeared in the skies above London, many people feared the worst. The city was destined to fare no better. Many people didn't know what to make of it at first, but soon portals started opening. These miniature breaches connected the skies of London to the depths of the oceans of Malifaux. Through them came seawater, as well as the Gibbering Hordes. These ancient never-born creatures live at the bottom of the ocean, and were unaccustomed to the difference in pressure and the sunlight. Many soon died on dry land, but some were able to quickly adapt, and immediately began hunting to feed their insatiable hunger. The hordes are organized in a loose caste system, and an individual pod can be made up of many different species. While the crawlers are less intelligent, and typically rank near the bottom, even the higher castes can turn into prey, especially if their leaders are unable to secure enough food. But what these creatures lack in organization, they make up for in adaptability. Those that were strong enough to survive in London have spread out and infested the subway tunnels and dark corners of the city, making them almost impossible to be eradicated entirely. Back in Malifaux, some of these creatures had been known to live in the swamps, adapting to an amphibious lifestyle, where some even created shrines to the tyrant Meridian. A few of the more intelligent among their number, such as the Storm Siren, can even remember the time of the Tyrant War, and occasionally she hears Meridian speak to her in her dreams. So the Gibbering Hordes have 4 commanders as of the newest expansion. The first is the Storm Siren. You might remember that the Sirens were actually a species of the Fae that Meridian recruited to her army during the Tyrant War. Well, some of those sirens are still around, and they still have the ability to use magic. The more powerful ones are able to use magic that controls the weather, and they become known as Storm Sirens. They can hear Meridian's call in the oceans of Malifaux, but on Earth, her voice seems to have gone silent. The next commander is the Frenzy. They like to fight in packs, and they're known for their aggression and their brutality. They regularly fight amongst each other to determine who's the strongest, which usually leads to 3 who become the leaders of the pod. They can't speak, but they communicate with each other telepathically, and those who they're not trying to communicate with will often pick up on these signals, giving them a sense of fear and discomfort. Hormatagi is a powerful creature that came from Malifaux to Earth in the 16th century. It found itself trapped here, and spent its time terrorizing the Maori, before they were eventually able to defeat it by putting it to sleep. When the Burning Man showed up, the infusion of magic woke Hormatagi from its sleep, and now it commands the Gibbering Horde, and it's also pledged itself to the Burning Man. Kawatora is a Kamon, who came across to Earth long ago. Somehow he has the ability to remain, even though most of his kind get pulled back to the Beyond, if they stay on Earth too long. He had mostly been dormant in the waters around the 3 kingdoms, but with the arrival of the Kamon and the Gibbering Hordes, he's risen, and is now able to command both armies. On the tabletop, the Gibbering Hordes are a horde army. No surprise. They're able to take a lot of bodies on the field, and they're particularly good at keeping those bodies there by reinforcing their dead models. They can even call back squads that are completely destroyed, which makes them really hard to beat by attrition. They also have very powerful commanders, and they tend to be particularly good at going up against enemy commanders, and taking out key pieces of your enemy's army. They don't have a ton in terms of range combat. Most of their units are much better in melee. Hey, so if you're finding this video helpful, then don't forget to leave it a like and subscribe to the channel. If you would consider sharing it with some friends who you think might find it helpful, that would be awesome. In addition, there's a whole bunch of links below for you to check out, including my weird affiliate link, so if you're going to be picking up any TOS stuff in the near future, you can use that link and it supports the channel directly. In addition, you can find a link to the Discord where you can come hang out with me and the rest of the community, as well as the merch store where you can pick up stuff with my logo and support the channel that way. Last, you can find a link to the Patreon where you can get early access to videos without ads, and a whole bunch of other benefits, so definitely check it out, and I appreciate any support you can give. But with that, let's get back to the video. Years before the Burning Man's arrival, a British noble by the name of Ephraim Wade seemed to have gone crazy. He began making fiery speeches about the end of the world and a deity of fire. Many people saw these as crazed ramblings, but slowly he began attracting a following. Soon he published his book, the Cantiones de Rege Flamme. The authorities wanted to crack down on his activities, but so far the cultist had done nothing wrong. That was until a New Year's Day celebration, where Wade and his followers showed up and berated the people before attacking them. Many people died, and Wade was arrested and sentenced to a lifetime of solitary confinement, as he was deemed a danger to himself and others. He was held by the Extraordinary Cases Bureau due to the fact that some of his ramblings seemed to have actually come true. In Malifaux, the Governor-General had hatched a plot to turn himself into a tyrant, but little did he know that some of his followers had actually sabotaged his plans, causing his ritual to go awry and building up way too much power. At the same time, the tyrant Cherufe sensed this buildup of power and tried to seize it, and he and the Governor-General fused together, forming the Burning Man and traveling back in time to appear in the skies over San Francisco. This caused an earthquake, and cultists began cropping up, leading to panic and destruction. Soon the Burning Man disappeared, and then reappeared over the city of London. The Black Operations team that was holding Wade realized that he was right all along and decided to let the man free. When he stepped out of his prison, portals began opening in the skies across London, and Wade and his followers began to transform. Their bodies sprouted talons, and limbs turned into twisted and warped tentacles, while others developed magical abilities. Cultists began cropping up in different places around the world, and they seem to attack anyone they can get their hands on. The Cult of the Burning Man has 3 commanders as of now. Adidatos is actually Ephraim Wade after he was transformed by the Burning Man. He possesses magical abilities, and he can also control the cultists through some sort of connection with them. He's also got a mastery of the portals, which allows him to move back and forth from Malifaux to Earth in different locations pretty much at will. Fenton Brams was a King's Empire soldier who was left for dead after a mission went wrong. As he was recovering, he got his hands on a copy of the Flamme, and the book took hold of him, causing him to turn to the Burning Man and devote his life to the cult. Horomatangi was a powerful creature in Malifaux that was accidentally transported to Earth. It was defeated by the Maori people and put to sleep, but it was reawoken by the power of the Burning Man. Now, not only does it lead the Gibbering Hordes, but it's also devoted itself to the Burning Man and can command its troops as well. On the tabletop, the Cult of the Burning Man is all about mobility. They have the ability to move across the board using portals, which can make them very unpredictable. They have a lot of medium-range magic as well as melee attacks, and they also have a lot of abilities that deal with cycling cards and getting benefits from flipping different suits. While nations were fighting each other during the Black Powder Wars, secret cabals were fighting behind the scenes to control all the nations and to gain power for themselves. While they fought over soulstones as well, one of these secret organizations decided to invest in non-magical but high-tech weapons of war. They traded these weapons to the desperate nations of the world in exchange for soulstones. By the end of the conflict, this organization, known as the Guild, had accumulated the vast majority of the soulstones left on Earth, and with them, the power. They began using this tremendous power to influence the other nations who were starved of soulstones, choosing to lend out their supply to only the nations that would bend their knee to the Guild. They began infiltrating governments and gaining influence over people at all positions of power, and soon few nations were able to resist their control. While the Guild itself doesn't have much in the way of a military, when some nations showed some defiance against the organization, they used their power to send the militaries of other nations to crush any resistance. When the breach to Malifaux reopened, the Guild was quick to secure both sides of the portal in order to guarantee their continued dominance of the soulstone trade. But with their attention turned elsewhere, soon the nations of Earth began defying the Guild, and without their cooperation, the Guild's power began to slip. Things might have turned bloody between the Guild and other nations such as the King's Empire, if it weren't for the arrival of the Burning Man and the influx of cultists and the Gibbering Hordes. So the Guild has 1 commander and 1 champion in the game. Sonya Crit is the commander for the Guild, and because she's the head of the Witch Hunters division, she was chosen to go back to Earth and investigate some unusual activity that was going on in Vietnam. She learned about some of the Court of Two's activity, and her investigation led her to a prison, which was then burned down by the court and blamed on her, and now she's looking to get back at them. The Guild's champion is Samantha Thrace. She's fiercely independent, so she's never been given command of Guild troops directly, but she's often sent out as a lone agent on different assignments. She's known for being good at getting people to cooperate with the Guild who might normally oppose them, and solving problems that might seem difficult or impossible to fix. Now on the table, the guild is not going to have a lot of bodies available, but they are very good at consistently reinforcing the units that they do have. They also have a lot of ways to get out of sequence attacks, and they flip to glory by discarding 2 cards, which means that you probably won't get your whole army to glory in one turn, but you will be able to pick out the specific units you need in glory and guarantee that it happens. Throughout history, beings have occasionally traveled between Malifaux and Earth through chaotic portals that would randomly open. One of these beings was a never-born shapeshifter who found himself on Earth and assumed various identities over the centuries. He eventually forgot everything about his old life in Malifaux and moved on to establish himself in Prague, where he did research, trying to find hints of who he used to be. As the magic began to drain from Earth, the shapeshifter had a harder and harder time changing form, but found that bloodshed would help in the effort. Eventually, even that didn't work, and the shapeshifter began to lose his consciousness, falling into a dreamlike state, and behaving more like an animal. He existed in this way for some time, until he was reawoken by the call of a nearby soulstone. He attacked the Abyssinian guards that were transporting it, and fed off of its power to regain his form. With his new lease on life, the shapeshifter soon heard about a place called Malifaux, and its native Neverborn that all seemed very familiar to him, but he had no desire to return to his homeworld, and instead continued to build his power on Earth. The Black Powder Wars were a time of great upheaval, which allowed the shapeshifter to profit greatly and continue his research. He soon found out that there were other denizens of Malifaux living on Earth, and he began to observe their behavior. The shapeshifter took on the name Anton de Wills and started organizing a ring of spies, informants, and scouts to expand his secretive power on Earth. Soon he decided to approach the other Neverborn and held a gathering where he proposed that they all work together. These Neverborn were naturally suspicious, but de Wills promised that they'd be able to use the great power he had amassed to their own ends if they only pledged to work for him as well. He even offered to share his power with another as equal partners, but none of the Neverborn took him up on the offer, as they all suspected it would put a target on their backs. The Court of Two now operates as many different cells that are all independent of each other, many not even aware of the other's presence. Only the inner circle is aware of de Wills and is plotting to control the whole organization. Many of the lesser cabals are even set against each other to keep up the secrecy. De Wills soon realized that all of this power was useless without a military that was capable of acting on his orders. He considered many different options, but decided that constructs or animated corpses would ruin his biggest advantage, secrecy. He soon learned about some Eastern resurrectionists who were working on the ability to soulbind, and he set out to recruit them to his cause and gather an army of ghosts. The Court of Two is a syndicate, and it currently has 1 commander and 1 champion. Karai is the commander for the Court of Two. She's very good at summoning ghosts, so Anton de Wills actually sought her out to try to get her to teach the rest of his followers. At first she said no, but then he told her that he could give her the secret to resurrecting her lost love. So she agreed and was able to teach his followers a much more reliable way to summon and bind the ghosts. Their champion is Bin Nguyen, who had the ability to summon from an early age. He was recruited to the Court of Two and worked with Karai, but he actually died during one of their missions. He was actually able to return as a ghost himself, and now he continues to work for the Court of Two, though he's given a lot more leverage than the other ghosts. On the tabletop, the Court of Two is all about summoning. Karai has the ability to summon new ghosts, and while most of their units aren't particularly powerful, the fact that she can pull in new units when she wants is really great. A lot of units in their army have the Revenge ability, which works similar to Karai's crew in Malifaux, where when the unit takes damage, they actually do a shot back at the attacker. It can be really powerful and punishing if your opponent doesn't know how to deal with it. The Three Kingdoms is comprised of the nations of Japan, China, and Vietnam. These nations have a history of animosity with each other, but the circumstances in the world at the start of the Black Powder Wars forced them to cooperate. They survived the massive worldwide war, only to see the guild rise in the power vacuum, and try to bring everyone under their control. The nations of the Three Kingdoms resisted, and the guild lashed out and launched a full-scale invasion, which they were not ready for. Each of the Three Kingdoms spent the better part of the next century under the guild's rule, but even before the chaos of the Burning Man's arrival, the beginnings of rebellions had already started. China was the first to stand against the guild, and as the rebellion took hold, the guild's forces were pulled away by the Battle of London and the appearance of the Gibbering Hordes as well as the cults of the Burning Man. In Japan, a recent incursion by the Common had devastated several of their cities, but when news came of China's newfound independence, it emboldened the last living member of the Meiji bloodline to stand up and push the weakened guild out. He had support by the Katanaka clan, though they preferred to stay in the shadows and not make their presence known. Last to fight back were the Vietnamese, who had suffered under particularly harsh conditions in their occupation by the guild and the French. They fought a brutal guerrilla war against their occupiers, and eventually drove them out as well. The three nations still have animosity towards each other, but their common position of resisting guild rule has once again brought them together. In spite of this, they've proven to be able to cooperate fairly well, putting aside their differences when push comes to shove, for the greater good. The new existential threat from the most recent Common invasion has only driven the three nations closer. The Three Kingdoms currently have 4 commanders available for them. The first is Ma Zhangwei. He's a great strategist who led China in their rebellion against the guild. He's known for being a skilled leader and commander, but he also leads his troops from the front, which has earned him their respect. The next commander is Lien Nguyen. She was a guerrilla fighter who helped chase the guild out of Vietnam. She's now been made the head of guerrilla warfare for Vietnam, and prefers to continue this type of fighting, even when her allies in Japan and China use a more traditional approach. Rio Edwards is British and Japanese, and he tried to follow in his father's footsteps and join the Royal Navy, but military life didn't work well for him. He was eventually shipped off to an Australian penal colony, but he escaped, put together a crew of sailors, and stole a ship to set off on his own adventures. Last is Shinsho. He's a bit of an enigma. He leads Three Kingdoms troops and has struck down lots of Kumon, but he sows chaos among the Three Kingdoms troops as well. No one really knows what his true intentions are, which only seems to amuse him. On the tabletop, the Three Kingdoms seem to be all about foiling your opponent's plans. They have lots of abilities that stop your opponent from using tokens, or certain abilities, and they themselves tend to get extra benefits from using their own tokens and other resources. They also have easy access to inspired tokens, and they go to glory when you play a stratagem, which they can chain to a second unit by spending 2 inspired tokens. Long ago, many Oni walked the earth and taught the humans how to use magic. Some were benevolent, but others were cruel and saw humans as weak and helpless. Eventually, they struck out at the humans, who called for help from the benevolent Oni, and a great war was fought. By the end, most Oni had returned to the Beyond. It's a place of desolation in a different realm, where time ticks at an unpredictable speed, and the landscape is vast and desolate. The Oni are tied to this realm, only able to travel to Earth for very short periods of time, without some source of magical power, or a gate where the barrier between the realms is weak. Over the centuries, the Oni made many incursions into Earth, trying to take over, but the humans always fought them off. Now, the Oni are making another attempt to take over, and this time their invasion is not limited to the east, as they seek to take the entire Earth. Their numbers are great, and when any individual is defeated, it seems to only be defeated in physical form, its essence being returned to the Beyond, where it slowly recovers. While the Three Kingdoms stand united against the Kumon invasion, some humans have turned to worshipping them, and have even assisted in their invasion attempts in the past. So the Kumon currently also have 4 commanders. Zhang Kui is a trickster, who likes to possess humans in order to stay on Earth. He was part of the last big Kumon invasion, and has always been trying to find ways to stay on Earth longer, which led him to finding a gate that lets him do just that. Takayasha was a great warlord in the Beyond. She fought her way through the other Kumon, and eventually earned a name for herself, but soon started to get bored, because everything she killed would just come back eventually. When she came to Earth, she was excited, because everything she killed stayed dead. Shinsho is a bit of a mystery. He can often be found leading Three Kingdoms troops, and killing lots of Kumon, but he also seems to turn on the Three Kingdoms as well. No one really knows what his goals are, and he thinks of himself as being smarter than anyone who tries to figure it out. Kawatora is a Kumon that came to Earth a long time ago. It's hid out in the waters around the Three Kingdoms, and mostly stayed dormant until the arrival of the Gibbering Hordes and the recent Kumon invasion. Now it's come out, and can lead the forces of both armies. On the table, the Kumon are all about power. They have a trigger that lets them boost their attacks faster than the other allegiances, and you automatically flip a certain number of units to glory every turn. They also have an interesting ability where all of their commanders attach a unique upgrade to themselves at the beginning of the game, which gives them the ability to summon a specific group of units during the game with a morale action. All these things combined sort of lets them build up their power throughout the game, and get stronger the longer it goes. And that's it for the factions of the other side. Now, I remember when the Kickstarter first came out, I had a really hard time picking my favorite faction in this game. Each one of them has some really cool models and some really interesting stories to them, and those choices have only gotten harder with the new factions coming to the game. I'm really excited about the Three Kingdoms and the Kumon, and I'm looking forward to getting those models in my hands in the near future. But let me know what you think. Out of the 8 factions that are available, which one is your favorite, and which one do you think you'll be picking up to jump into the game? And if there's something about that faction that made it jump out to you the most, then let us know that as well. Stay tuned to the channel because I'm hoping to do some more stuff on TOS in the near future. And with that, I want to send a huge thanks to the extremely cool kids here on Patreon, the Steam Powered Scoundrels, Dogmatized, and by Club Sky Gator Games. Thanks for watching.